I'd now like to introduce Dr. Jan Hoffmann, who has worked as Trade Facilitation, Port and Shipping Specialist at UNCTAD's Trade Logistics branch since 2003. He's currently Chief of the organisation's Trade Facilitation section. He is, among other things, in charge of various international trade facilitation projects, as well as regional and national projects in Africa, Asia and Latin America. He co-edits the quarterly UNCTAD Transport newsletter and is co-author and coordinator of the annual UNCTAD Review of Maritime Transport. Previously, he spent 6 years with the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean and 2 years with the IMO in London and also Santiago. Prior to this, he held part-time positions as assistant professor, import-export agent, translator, consultant, and seafarer for a tramp shipping company. Very diverse. Jan has studied in Germany, the United Kingdom and Spain, and holds a doctorate degree in economics from the University of Hamburg. His work has resulted in numerous UN and peer-reviewed publications, lectures and technical missions, and here today to talk to us about trade facilitation, implementation and development, Dr. Jan Hoffmann.
Okay. Thank you very much, David, and really congratulations to you and the team and the host country for this very timely event. I'd like to start out with this photo because we are speaking about the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, and I wanted to show you this photo first of all to show you the building of the WTO, which you see down there. So that's the building of the WTO. Second reason why I want to share this photo with you is I want to share with you the view I have out of my office window. So that's a beautiful view. And the third reason with this photo, you of course also see that UNCTAD is above the WTO. Now we are higher than the WTO. What I want to run through with you, now I do press the right button, but let me, is it connected? Okay, yeah, if that's, yeah, now it works. Now it works. No, I did correct. It was just that, okay, it seems to work. Sorry. We have all spoken about that obviously it's a no-brainer. Trade facilitation is good for trade, and the latest trends in globalized production make trade facilitation even more important. I want to make this a bit more specific. I will run through 10 global trends in trade and logistics and then link them to more specific trade facilitation measures that are included in the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement. And then I will discuss a little bit the question of the chicken and the egg and come to implementing trade facilitation. Let's start with 10 global trends in trade and logistics. Okay, now this is really, it's not, sorry, that's, I'm jumping the gun. So, trend number one, I think you have to, it's hidden. The sensor is not, now it should work better. Thanks. Okay, trend number one, exports of manufactured goods. Today, developing countries have become major exporters also of manufactured goods. They are no longer just exporters of raw materials, as can be seen in the chart in 1970s. Developing countries were just exporting raw materials and importing low volumes of manufactured goods. Trend number two, globalized production. Today, trade is part of supply chains. And you see at this chart how the trade in intermediate products has grown tremendously. Trend number three, security concerns. We all know this. Trend number four, what we call in UNCTAD the new geography of trade. We have a growing south-south trade. Again, a chart here showing how we have much more trade among the so-called developing countries. Trend number four, regional integration, increased regional and transit trade. For example, a growing intra-African trade. Trend number six, changing logistics expenditures. Within logistics expenditures, We have far more expenditures today on transport, which is the blue bar on this chart, as compared to expenditure on inventory holding, which is the red part. So in the past, we would spend money on warehousing and capital costs and insurance, and now we spend money on transport because things have to move. So these first 6 trends were sort of on the demand side. We need more trade facilitation, and I will be a bit more specific in a minute. We also have more possibilities thanks to technologies. And it is not just IT and computers, it is above all also the computer. And as The Economist put recently in an article called "The Humble Hero," containers have been more important for globalization than liberalization, than freer trade. More important than the WTO and even more important than UNCTAD. Trend number 8, we have more private sector participation. Port operations, shipping lines, and so on and so forth are more and more run by the private sector. All the growth in the port traffic, for example, is handled by private port operators from Hong Kong, Dubai, Singapore, and so forth. Tariff reductions, just highlighting for most developing countries' exports, international transport costs are 2 to 3 times higher than the customs tariffs on imports in the destination countries. And last but not least, trend number 10 is the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement. So I have those 10 trends, and now I want to link them to the TF agreement. For example, advance ruling, which those in customs know very well, in advance ruling, it's one of the 37 measures in the TF agreement. It is more important for manufactured goods than it is for raw materials, for obvious reasons. So, or put it differently, because today we have more trade in manufactured goods, this particular TF measure is more important than in the past. So I'm giving all of us some better, stronger arguments as a sales pitch for the measures included in the TFA. Second example, we have globalized production, and this is something in particular the authorized operators are very interested in. No, they don't mind opening their books and having a special deal, being more transparent, because they participate in globalized production. Security concerns. Of course, the measure risk management. It's another one of those 37. It's actually my favorite one. I'm economist, and for me that's a perfect win-win. If you do a good risk assessment, you open a smaller number of containers, but you increase the likelihood of catching the bad guys. Trade geography. We have more South-South trade, more trading everybody with everybody, and then of course we also need more, for example, internet publication, which is another one of those measures. As regards regional integration, Article 11 of the TFA is about transit. But transit is also included in several of the other articles, which is of particular interest for the landlocked countries. Many of the articles that in the past, like Article 8 and 10, were mostly on imports and exports, they now also specifically mention transit. Logistics, well, one of the measures that helps to speed up processes is separate release from clearance, Article 7.3 of the TFA. Technologies allow for quite a few of those measures, pre-arrival processing, electronic payments, and so forth. Private sector participation, the national TF committees are one key tool to facilitate their participation. Just to reiterate, transport costs, trade facilitation are more important than tariffs. Here I'm speaking to the converted, I guess. I'm preaching to the converted. And the inclusion of those measures, the new trade facilitation agreement, is sort of a response to the trends in international trade, transport, logistics, and technologies. It is not that TF is suddenly more important because of the WTO agreement. No? But still, we have the Post-Bali putting policy into practice. It is more important because of those trends I just summarized. Now, coming to the chicken and the egg, TF and development. For example, developing information and communication technologies. The introduction of ICTs by customs may encourage small and medium-sized enterprises to also connect to the internet. On the other side, or in the other direction, if a country is already very well connected and all the SMEs are already very ICT competent, then it is easier to introduce those TF measures. Or reforms of legal regimes that facilitate the use of electronic documents. They also help to modernize other business practices. A framework for bank guarantees for transit trade helps improve the financial system. Developing trust, increased transparency is good for good governance in general. So, one way to put this into a question, is red tape an obstacle to development? Or is red tape the result of a lack of development? If you take the WTO perspective, you highlight the first point. Red tape is an obstacle to development. And if you facilitate trade, it helps your development. At the same time, at UNCTAD, we were also highlighting more the other direction. The lack of trade facilitation is also the result of difficulties, challenges faced by the countries. So the answer is, of course, it is both. If you have more income to finance trade facilitation, you have better trade facilitation, you have more trade, you have more income to finance trade facilitation. If you have better services, you have more trade, more income to finance infrastructure, better services. And if you have lower trade costs, you have more trade, you have economies of scale, you have lower trade costs. So, trade facilitation is good for trade and for development, and development is good for trade and transport facilitation, trade facilitation. And here I'd like to recommend a little book that has nothing to do with trade facilitation, nothing to do with UNCTAD, just a little book that some of you may have read. It's called The Tipping Point by a guy called Malcolm Gladwell. It's just how to get things started. And I would say let's start with trade facilitation. Let's start with implementation. And there are 3 levels of implementation. In Geneva, when you speak about the trade facilitation agreement, the delegates, and actually it is not yet in force. You know, this trade facilitation agreement is not yet in force because countries need to notify categories, they need to ratify, there needs to be a protocol of amendment. On the ground, on the ground, the second level is what we are working on. We need to have the national TF committees, which are included in the agreement. You need to have gap analysis, implementation plans for those 40 measures. And only if you have those on the ground, then the countries and their delegates in Geneva can implement the agreement. And this may sound like far-fetched for those who come from capitals, but in Geneva that is quite a challenge, and we try to highlight this importance, how to link what is happening on the ground so that the agreement can actually enter into force. What we have done in UNCTAD, we have developed national trade facilitation implementation plans with 30 countries so far, and we have worked with national TF committees to strengthen their capacity to do this work. And some of the lessons learned are, okay, in these 30 plans you see here, you see the little arrows indicate those that are LDCs, least developed countries. So you see that the level of implementation is lower if you are less developed. Not a big surprise here, but still we were able to sort of quantify it and confirm that there is a challenge in implementation. The other side of the same coin, the least developed countries need more technical assistance. The number of measures where they need technical financial assistance is much higher on average in the least developed countries compared to the other developing countries. Implementing the agreement from our study, our research, would in most cases, most countries take around 5 years. And how much would it cost? I'm an economist, it depends on your starting point. Every country is different, depends on your ambition. It depends also maybe some trade-offs. If you want to be very quick and want to hire EU consultants, European Union consultants that cost 600 euros per day, then maybe you get it quicker. If you want to develop your own capacity, maybe it would take a little longer. So there are trade-offs. One last step back, Mr. Chairman, if you allow me, from the implementation to the development. Why do we want trade facilitation? Okay, the WTO wants trade facilitation, it's good for trade. You, the customs, want it is good for customs. It increases revenue collection, improves controls, saves revenues, plus the specific measures, and at UNCTAD we like to highlight this, most measures on their own are good for development. Beyond trade policies, for our children, our future, and so I like photography, and so there are some photos of children. I have 3 of them myself, as far as I know. So trade facilitation reforms help to formalize trade, get the informal sector into the formal sector, save time frustrations, improve governance, empower women entrepreneurs, strengthen regional integration, modernize public administrations, foster IT capacities, improve security. This is at the airport of Kabul. Please unload your weapon here. And increase revenue collection, really important tool. So, to sum up, I've presented you 10 global trends, some recent data from UNCTAD research, linked them to specific TF measures beyond the big picture, highlighted the challenges, the link, the chicken and the egg, and highlighted the main steps that need to be done, which is the TF committees and the implementation plans. And here we are back to my usual view out of my office window. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan, and help to reinforce also what was said in the Trade Facilitation Agreement, that developing countries and least developed countries are going to need quite a bit of technical assistance and capacity building support to get them to where they need to be in terms of the agreement.